So you were just roaming around Art Basel. So as we bring the rest of the panel back on, let's bring Kaliya back and Adam back. What did you see in terms, Salim, as you were roaming all around Art Basel in Miami? I was telling Adam they ran Pixel Mind Basel or Pixel Basel in Decentraland, which I visited, and that was super fun. So I'd love to maybe use that as a transition into the panel, and then we'll start to get into some of the questions. We do have quite a few questions queued up today.
The big thing is, what do I remember about last week? Because it was such a dense week. I was running into people on the streets and saying hi, etc. So Michael Janssen, one of our guests from last week who worked with Adam, was there. So we hung out a bit. I think the buzz was unbelievable. You also have the inevitable chaotic, there was an event called Blockchain in Space, and you're like, oh, okay. And there are all these incredibly bizarre things happening, which indicates the broader trend. But I think let's get to the other questions.
All right. Well, I'm super excited to see IPFS nodes in space personally, but that should be there. So we'll actually not quite be interplanetary yet, but we'll get there. So let's do it. Topic today, reminder for everyone, is are NFTs a fad? So I think we should just start with that. And I'm going to toss this out to you first, Adam. And so the question that came in is, why are NFTs more than a fad? So
yeah, so I addressed this. Thank you for the question. I addressed this a little bit in kind of my opening, but basically, NFTs are the popularization by any means necessary of a fundamental reinvention of how we own stuff and how we address that ownership on the internet and where it's visible and what you can do with it. So that one, So Kaliya, I think, gave a really great overview, actually, of the kind of non-token focused side of distributed identity. One point that I would make is that if we were talking about using like a Bitcoin address or an Ethereum address as an identifier, then I would agree with you on your point that it's not very durable. But the nice part about NFTs is that they are tokens. And tokens are by their nature transferable, and so they can simply be transferred from one identity to another identity. And it basically is the same thing by different means. But the challenge that I've seen in technology over and over again is that being good doesn't mean you win. Being good just means you have a good solution, but it doesn't mean that anybody uses it. And for a long time in crypto, that was a big problem that we had around these kind of identity solutions. I started my company Tokenly in 2014 to support my own use case with my rewards program, because I realized that although I could do a token that would allow me to do what I wanted, no infrastructure existed to support any of the things that I wanted to do with it. And so I built out a startling and bewildering array of different products that I never thought that I would build in order to just simply be able to accomplish my aims. And for a very long time, all the things that we built, we would talk to people and nobody understood why we were building them, because the idea of non-currency tokens was like bizarre and didn't appear to have any use cases. But it was always about this reinvention of ownership on the internet. And so, Kent, you said that, the last 2 years, NFTs have been becoming a thing sort of to the general public. I would argue that that really started in January of this year. I think that the time frame on it has been incredibly short. If you want to look for precursors in terms of what caused the sort of spark that we've seen this year, I would peg that very firmly to some of the precursor artwork, but very much the sports world. It was NBA Top Shot, and it was the NBA as a major brand coming on and deciding to do one of these projects that really started to certainly attract attention from myself and lots of other people who had been working on these ideas for a long time, but they didn't really have any traction. So to me, the question isn't about what's the best solution, it's about what's the best solution that we can actually get into use. And just the incredible fear of missing out that exists right now in the world of NFTs is a signaling cycle that we've seen before, where effectively you have a technology that is basically far overvalued relative to its current actual utility and worth. But that value then sort of sends up a flare, and then that flare attracts attention from people who really can bring that value and those types of use cases into whatever the particular area that is attracting that attention. And it's not immediate, it's a process that typically takes years, but the signaling events, once it happens, has tended to do that. At least so far we've seen that with both Bitcoin and Ethereum, And my belief at this point is that NFTs represent the next one of those, and I won't be surprised if it's DAOs after that. So I'll stop at this point, but that gives you an idea.
That's great. I have a handful of questions here about DAOs. I'm going to hold those and separate them a little bit because I think it's a very interesting use case. Let's take before I move on to the next, Kaliya, did you want to add anything to that around why NFTs are? The question again is why are NFTs more than a fad? Anything you want to add there or no?
So I only am convinced they're not a fad because Salim says so. Well, I'm actually really interested in the intersection with physical objects and NFTs. So I'm an artist. I've been drawing. If you've ever seen me at a conference, I usually have a sketch pad and I'm drawn away. And I have 30 years of art at this point. And I actually am like, I want to sell it, but I don't want to just sell it normally. I'm looking at Materium as a pathway to like basically tag the physical art and have its life cycle be managed digitally. So that when someone sells the art that they bought from me to someone else, potentially, this is common fractional ownership, I think. Is that what it's called? Where I still own, like I sell 90% of my art and then I still own 10%. And then when it sells, I get 10% of the revenue from the next sale.
Typically that's called a royalty split is what they typically call it in there. Fractionalized ownership is a thing, but it's slightly different in terms of the application to which it's usually applied.
Okay, so I'm still trying to figure out this world. At least conceptually, I'm sort of going in the right direction. So that's where my interest is, and I think too, like I have a little bit of a kind of nervousness when I hear people talking about like using NFTs for identity use cases. I really hope that that's done wisely and thoughtfully, and that the wrong technology isn't used in use cases that could be used. I mean, so we'll see. I mean, it's going to be an interesting journey to see how all this plays out in the so, as you said, the real world of real adoption for real problems.
Awesome. So a couple of quick notes. You mentioned a Materium, Kaliya. This is we can post this link into the chats. It's Materium, Mattereum.com, and they've created something called the Materium Asset Passport, which is trying to create a legal framework and an arbitration framework to connect real world goods with basically NFTs. And it's really fascinating work. And I've taken a deep dive on that one, and I absolutely love what they're up to there. So, Salim, you said you had about 100 questions. So opportunity number one to toss one of those out there.
So if I'm a country and I want to issue unique identifiers, aka passports or identity cards to citizens, I'm curious, Adam, what the technical appropriateness of NFTs is for that use. It sounds like a no-brainer at one level for me. But Kaliya, what are the other policy or legal issues that may come up? Because you've been looking at a lot of this stuff around sovereign ID, et cetera, et cetera.
So first, like, don't do it. So I think, what's really key about the verifiable credentials work is that that's the technology I would use, is a verifiable credential. In fact, you have states already using this to do that. So South Korea is going to use it for its driver's license. Looks like the government of Ontario, Canada is going this direction. The EU just announced its digital wallet program that points in the direction that it'll likely adopt this verifiable credential standard. And it has several large projects like the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework, ESIF, and the European Blockchain, EBSI. I don't even know what, anyways, they're doing great. So what happens is that the government can take the thing that it issues to you today in paper and package up all that information on that paper document, whether it's a passport or a driver's license or whatever, and digitally sign it and hand it to you in a digital wallet you control. This is really different than anchoring it to something persistent on a blockchain. A key, you basically make the individual the pivot point for sharing information about themselves and no one else. So it's really important that we don't actually give persistent, unique identifiers to everyone that they should use for everything, because that creates sort of a panoptic state of affairs where everybody's watching everybody do everything and we have no privacy. That's
Isn't
not
that where
the
we
world
are
want.
now? I mean, the best framing I've seen for the world today is the framing of a global airport, right? In an airport, you know you're being surveilled and your rights can be taken away at any time. And certainly in many countries today, you're living like that on a day-to-day basis. London with the hundreds of cameras that are tracking you, etc. I'm not saying that should be the case, obviously. Let me flip the question a slightly different way. If you had a country, or is there a way of issuing a passport on a self-sovereign ID basis where the state doesn't get to say what's happening, because you get into all sorts of interesting issues of jurisdiction at that point?
What do you mean where the state? I mean, yeah, well, they can issue that information to you in the format of a verifiable credential, and you decide who you share with and how much information from that credential you want to share.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Adam, you want to weigh in on that one? I think.
Yeah, I'd love to. So first off, I actually don't disagree with anything that was said just now. I think that, like what I'm concerned about is how do we popularize these technologies and what use cases are they good for today? The history of technology is not one of, things rolling out to 6 billion people in the first go. It's very much a slow progression of the people who have the most money to spend on it and the most time to waste on it. They're the ones that sort of pay for the initial stages of development, adoption, prove that it's cool, and then it kind of goes from there. So that's very much where I think NFTs are today. There are lots of hard problems still to solve around these things, but they do enable things that are not possible with the current sort of status quo. And that is the ability to have pseudonymous relationships on the internet where you're known by certain identifiers. And effectively, as I said, membership in a social club or in a sort of country club on the internet is, I think, the perfect use case for these things at first. I expect that we're going to see all-inclusive resorts that are built around, instead of having traditional timeshare ownerships, your ownership will be represented by an NFT, and having that will be your pass to do various things. But it's not the sort of thing where I'd say, well, the country of Ghana should adopt, NFTs and have, a social club that has all of their people in it. I think that that's not the stage that we're at right now. But again, the question is, how do you get from here to there? And I think that how do you get from here to there, I really like what I'm seeing in the, and I think that it is important that the things be monetizable too, because like it or not, we live in an age of mania. And that mania drives people towards things that appreciate and value faster than everything else around them. And so to the extent that these draw attention is to the extent that they popularize some of the ideas and technologies behind not just NFTs, but behind these concepts of identity and ownership. And that is, I think, the big sea change that we're still walking towards, although we are certainly not there today.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. And Salim, thanks for that great question. The next question, actually, you sort of already led us there a little bit, Adam. I want to talk a little bit about other use cases for NFTs. And this is kind of what we're talking about, the possibility of, identity for a nation. And we've seen really interesting points of views. But what are some, so again, if you look back to sort of, as you mentioned, the sports use cases, we look back at CryptoPunks as one of the earliest, more successful art projects. What are we seeing now? And I think you can mention things like games, right? So we're looking at Axie Infinity, and there is going to be a Cambrian explosion of games using NFTs. We just saw Warner Brothers release a collection of NFTs, which are effectively avatars for forms of games. So even beyond games, but art, games, business, other, anything that you can think of, what are going to be some really amazing use cases for NFTs over time?
So it was mentioned in one of the earlier questions, this concept of tying NFTs to real world items. I actually think that that's also a use case we're not ready for yet. It's one that people have been excited about for a long time. But to the extent that you try to take a technology that only has awareness of what's happening on a blockchain and attempt to extend that control into the real world, is to the extent you're reintroducing third parties and some sort of verifier or some sort of trusted entity who has to then do that. There are lots of projects out there that seek to solve this problem. I'm not making negative comments about any of them. I'm simply saying that it is much easier for me to conceptualize things that can be made aware or can be natively aware of what's going on a blockchain themselves. Most of the time when you're using a blockchain and when you're using tokens in a non-currency capacity, you are actually not using a blockchain directly. You are building a system that is traditional software that then looks at a blockchain as its source of truth around certain elements. So one of my favorite use cases is the idea of, we have these keyless fobs, right, that we use to activate our cars now. There's no reason why that can't actually be an NFT, and where that's something where if you want to lend your car to somebody, then you can simply transfer the NFT to that person on a temporary basis and then have specific controls over the ability to reel that back. I think that there are lots of use cases that, sort of fall into that category. Another one that comes immediately to mind that was one of the first projects that was actually sort of envisioned in the space back in the very early days of DAOs was the idea of using this effectively to replace kind of the key cards that you have for hotel doors, right? Where rather than getting a key card, the hotel simply transfers temporarily, on a smart contract or using an off-chain system entirely, access to this credential, which then when you present your phone to it using NFC or something like that, is able to then unlock that door. And it is basically an improvement on the existing system that sort of throws away a lot of the infrastructure that we have today and starts to put us more towards that, the more sort of online focused one before. But in the short term, I think the one I'm most excited about, and it may not be surprising, is specifically around fundraising. I think that, I came to the crypto space just having personally participated in lots of fundraising campaigns. And one of the things about those is that when you support something, you effectively get back a promise that you have a claim towards this thing that you have purchased effectively in advance. But there are lots and lots and lots of edge cases that always pop up in those crowd funds where someone needs money back for some reason or another. And by nature of the way that this happens, and there are regulatory reasons why it's this way too, I would later discover, you can't sell your interest in that project. You can't transfer it to someone else who missed the sale. And so you're just kind of stuck there. And so I saw very early on a variety of projects that I participated in that almost collapsed because somebody would want a refund and then other people would want refunds. And you could have this kind of run for the door, momentum that would kind of kill projects because the projects needed that money in order to pull it off. That's why they raised that amount. So adding in secondary markets certainly complicates things. And we're seeing this in the world of gaming today as companies on the one hand who are on the sort of game publishing side line up and say, hey, we're going to do NFTs because this represents a substantial revenue opportunity for us. And platforms on the other side are like, yeah, we're really not interested in doing that because it's going to make us money transmitters in the eyes of the law, among other problems that emerge. So, the complexity that you get there from a regulatory standpoint comes with the advantage of then being able to create true price discovery and true liquid markets, which is on the one hand very empowering for a lot of people who own stuff on the internet, and is very terrifying for companies who monopolize that ownership and who benefit very much from that built-in moat that they have.
Wonderful. Salim, are you trying to say something there? Or are you
Nope.
okay? Okay,
Not
great.
even
Got more. Okay, so you brought up
access and parse the 85 concepts that Adam just
Yeah,
doing
sorry.
the
Yeah.
No, this is awesome. People can watch this on replay. They can speed it up, slow it down. It's okay. Go as dense as you want. The you brought up this one's not in the questions, but you tapped on it, Adam. So I want to touch on this around regulatory management and controls law. It's crazy. And this is an interesting one where you can talk a little bit about DAOs and NFTs and all of it together, because if you ask, you could ask 10 people, where is the best place to create a legal entity for your DAO? You will get 27 answers back, right? Because no one actually knows. There is no actual answer that's really good. NFTs and and are actually going through a similar situation. That point you made about accidentally becoming a money transmitter, that's serious business, and that's ruled by international law, and can be quite an issue if you find yourself there. So I really appreciate you bringing that one up. One of the other questions we have from the audience, this was one of the questions we had in advance. And by the way, if you're watching and you have a question that's come up along the way, please don't be shy. Put that into the team and they will add it to the list of questions we have here, and I will be notified and I will try to get those in. We still have plenty of time for your questions. So if you're watching and you have a question or a concern, or you're absolutely freaked out, just let us know and we'll talk about it. But one of the questions is, how do NFTs enable us to create longer-term client relationships for brands? Raise your hand if you want to take that one first. Okay.
I was talking to Sam Engelbart of Galaxy Digital, who's one of the top investors in this space, and he basically, his viewpoint was that your wallet of NFTs will essentially become your brand affiliations over time. And it'll completely change the advertising marketing game, because instead of having to flash and hope that you see something or get interested in something, you'll be able to gauge the interest. But what's really powerful about that is that ownership of those affiliations sits now with you, right? Which is really incredibly powerful. And you can, as Kaliya mentioned, reveal that, hey, I'm really interested in left-handed Lithuanian folk dancers or not. And you can filter now and show your own persona as part of that. One of the fascinating commentaries and observations I have specifically for Kaliya is it seems like NFTs now allow you to have a different identity per service you're affiliated with. That's all under your control. Whereas it's been the other way around. You have your eBay ID, your Google ID, your Facebook ID, and your identity is derived by that. But now it seems we can take more control of it. And Kaliya, does that get you excited?
It does, but I think you get that there with decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. I think I'm actually can't wait for the NFT crowd to show up at IIW and vice versa, because I think there's a lot of mutual learning about how this actually works in practice. As we were talking, I was like, oh, you need to figure out how did comm channels get opened up from NFTs that you have, so you can have a direct, secure communication channel with your brand, right? NFTs are just like baubles in space. They don't necessarily do anything. And
she's right.
DidComm has a lot of potential in terms of building a channel, a secure, owned by the company channel between themselves and their customers, as opposed to being disintermediated by the platforms that they currently communicate and connect on.
Okay. Let's drill into something you said there. I like this. NFTs are baubles in space that don't necessarily do anything. So I think that I have been seeing
How do you really feel about them, Kaliya?
Yeah, no, I got you. It's okay.
They're like art. Does art do anything? I mean, we can have an existential question.
Does art do anything from an artist? No, I love that. Okay. That's great, Kaliya. Well, let me qualify this a little bit. I'm not judging it one way or the other, but I'm looking to say, okay, are there any positions that might counter that statement? So let's look at cybercons. Adam, maybe this would be for you. Cybercons do something. They, in a way, right? It's a membership club of sorts, and they emit these bananas, and then the bananas can be used for other things. So is that doing something, or is that not doing something, or is it just silly? What do you think?
I mean, I think that for as long as people have been creating, instruments that they want people to put money into, they've been trying to dress them up as not securities while actually delivering security type benefits. So I think that when you add that type of functionality into a token, then it looks a lot like a security. And so to me, that's a sign that we have a problem here. But I think that, again, it's a space that's going to sort itself out. Now, to the specific comment, I agree with Kaliya. I don't think that NFTs typically do something. I think that typically they're a transferable, marketable, monetizable, and potentially useful, but not necessarily and not generally, marker that then is made useful within other systems, but are not inherently useful themselves. And that's an important distinction, because it means that it's one part of a larger system, and it's a neutral part of a larger system. And again, the only thing that I really see that's different between doing ID with NFTs versus doing ID with the types of work that Kaliya has been talking about is just the monetizable part. And it's really just a question of whether or not it's valuable to be able to have transferable, sellable, and create marketplaces around these type of identities. I think there are good arguments on both sides of that. And right now, again, from an adoption standpoint, I'm excited about it because I think it is compelling a lot of interest in an area that otherwise is, very boring. Again, it's not that things like PGP haven't been around for a long time that are why people don't use encryption. It's that why would most people care, right? Most people in practice don't care, and it's harder. So if it's harder and you don't care, then why would you do it? Whereas, again, in the world of NFTs, the whole thing is that it's hard, intentionally so, oddly intentionally so. And that actually just builds up more value, because it means that if you make it through jumping through all these dumb hoops, then you wind up with something that actually is marketable and can represent a serious monetary gain. And there are lots of people out there who I know who make more money playing dumb games, like literally Pac-Man style games in the world of NFTs, than they do working at a professional job that they've trained for and worked in for 30 years. So I mean, like that type of magnet to these new ideas or to these new implementations of old ideas, I think is incredibly valuable. And that's, again, where they don't do anything, but that one little feature set, I think, fundamentally changes the game when it comes to adoption. And that's why I'm so interested.
Very interesting. Kaliya, you want to come in on that?
No, I mean, I agree. I think it's funny that we have these different perspectives.
awesome.
Where we like,
I just want to throw something in. There's a key piece of NFTs that makes it really highly useful rather than just a JPEG with an identifier in it, which is the fact that you can program them, right? So you can in these games, they're taking two cyber Kongs and you can make baby Kongs, only if you have this type of a cyber Kong, and they can have different characteristics that yield different utility depending on the characteristics you have. So you essentially have this programmable thing that can then have multiple outputs and have a whole flow of future to it that is totally distinct from traditional art. Right? Traditional art, you look at it, you experience it in whatever way. But this is now an art piece that mints other art pieces under the right conditions, has babies under the right conditions, mints a utility token, changes as you change, depending on how you want to dress it up. If you have the right things with the right widgets, etc., can go into the metaverse and do certain things with it. So this is, I think, it's like the cryptocurrencies aren't interesting because they're digital. They're interesting because they're programmable, and we can program money that becomes supremely interesting. Just like we can now program these NFTs to do various other. I think that's the real power. I think we're just starting the experience of what could we do with these things.
There's another flip to that, Salim, just to add on. Not only are they programmable, remember there's the data and the metadata. The metadata is equally important. And in fact, when you hear all of these stories about NFTs disappearing, impermanence, and using things like IPFS or ARweave, don't forget that the NFT itself cannot just be programmable, which it is, it can program. And that's what you mean when you say two CyberKongs making a new baby Kong. You're combining the genetic material or the metadata of these two NFTs, and it's actually running. It's being plugged into a piece of code that then knows, like DNA or something, that knows how to do something with that. So these NFTs with their associated metadata are also programmers. And that's pretty crazy. And they're highly portable as well. If someone's to accept or make their code compatible with that metadata, then it can enter their context as well. And I know that's a little bit trippy in a way, but it is absolutely true. And this is kind of a big promise of blockchains and cryptocurrency is, we call it programmable money. Sometimes people call that Bitcoin programmable money, but look what just happened. Did the whole world just become a computer?
So just to say, so I agree with that perspective. My answer was more to what is the current state, and like I said, as I said earlier, like I just view where we are today as still the play stupid games, win stupid prizes part of the curve. And again, like I think that these are all great experiments, and I think the part that I like the most is that it's not a centralized effort. There's no standards body that has to come to an agreement about a thing. It's just 1,000 or 10,000 different experiments that are all out there. And as we've seen from this space in the past, whatever is perceived to have worked will then become the best practice for 10,000 projects that will then ape it, so to speak. And that will kind of pull us in that direction. So yeah, I mean, I would say the potential for these projects to be really meaningful and to actually have, I don't know if I would necessarily call it built-in utility, but some form of value that goes beyond the identifier and the image, and the ability to control certain things potentially as well. Like that definitely is where NFTs are going, but it's not where they are today.
Very well said. I'm going to shift us to another question that just came in live.